So the next question will start with Steve. Please state your views in increasing clean energy in Chugach's generation portfolio. You may want to address sources, timeline for incorporation, cost, and solutions for non-dispatchable power.
I've been involved in the Alaska State Legislature in the House Special Committee on Energy, and back in 2015 when we had Chugach basically testifying about an independent system operator and the needs in the generation mix. Ever since then, I've been involved in policy discussions on a renewable portfolio standard and a clean energy standard, and the language we use is important here. There are people that have the agenda to put micro-nuclear power plants on the grid in the rail belt in this next 10-year period. And I've worked at two national laboratories in energy, RD&D. I worked in the Office of the Governor in the state of Alaska on long-term energy planning back before 1980. So some of these solutions, there's lots of people vying for this space about what the generation mix should look like and whether things have emissions that are fossil fuel emissions that contribute to greenhouse gases and contribute basically to the climate and health effects we see. I think it's pretty obvious at the federal level with the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act that the federal government's going a different direction than building coal-fired power plants, for example. And in Alaska, we're kind of reducing our dependence on coal too. Natural gas, we're 80% dependent on. That means to me the change in the generation mix and calling it renewable energy rather than just clean energy because it doesn't emit carbon dioxide, I think is the right way to go. The devil's in the details. I think it's going to be complicated. It needs to be negotiated, and we need really good governance skills to transform our system because we have the most promise in the rail belt. We can lead the Rail Belt Reliability Council, and our future is ours for the taking, but we have to figure out a way to get there with all of the members that we have on board, and I appreciate the expertise we already have in this arena.
All right, Sheena.
You know, I think we've been really fortunate to have local abundant natural gas, and we've had that for 60 years now. We're coming to an energy crossroads, and that happens to coincide with an incredibly unique opportunity to access 30% discounts on renewable energy projects. So, you know, we've in the past had this conversation about renewables and I think right now we can talk about the great things that renewable energy can bring to the table. We still have a lot of challenges. The utilities from Fairbanks to Homer on the rail belt grid are working together to apply for large amounts of federal funding for transmission improvements and storage that will allow us to bring on more renewable energy. And so I'm excited to see them work together. I applaud this effort, and I'd like to see the same for the renewable energy projects. Like the federal transmission discounts, we can bring on renewable energy and integrate that much more fully with those transmission and storage upgrades. And so in the past where we've talked about the cost of renewables, you know, we have this opportunity to really optimize how much federal funding we can get in order to set us up for a reliable, sustainable path over the next coming decades. And so it's this, you know, very unique opportunity that we haven't seen before. I'm excited for the rail belt utilities to work together. I think that the upcoming, as Steve mentioned, the Rail Belt Reliability Council that has been implemented is going to be a great opportunity to work as a team and figure out what the most cost-effective projects are and work on those, build out transmission from there. And I hope that we can take advantage of this opportunity.
All right, Brad.
Okay, so when you talk about the potential sources of clean energy, we're talking hydroelectric, wind, and solar. And there are studies that are ongoing right now, I understand, for across the inlet. I think one is called the Little Susitna Project for a major wind project, looking at the feasibility of a utility-scale solar there, or utility-scale wind project there. I believe there's also a utility-scale solar project that's being evaluated over there. And that's the kind of feasibility studies that needs to occur to determine the timeline and the feasibility of bringing that into our energy mix. Micronuclear may also be a part of that, but those are the primary sources. And on the timeline, I know that, I think in the strategic plan for Chugach, we're looking at a 35% reduction in our carbon footprint by 2030 and 50% by 2040. So those are ambitious goals. They're probably realistic. And some of our challenges to that, though, is our transmission system for the rail belt intertie there are constrictions in it that will be challenging because the upgrades to that are very expensive, in the $2 to $3 billion range, and so trying to find and arrange funding, and I understand the utilities are working together on that. There's a working group, and I think Chugach is leading that working group to identify the project and the funding sources for those upgrades, because they're critical for making that transition to the renewable energy sources like solar and wind and so on.
I think it's important that we explore those options. They are the ones before us. They're going to help move us forward, especially in light of, our dwindling or finite amount of supply that we have today for natural gas. And I'm not going to pretend to say that I think it should be one type of energy versus another. I think it's important, more so, that we, as a cooperative, make a determination for ourselves on that future. Alaska has always had a propensity to be reliant on the federal government for funding and for, I'll say, help and assistance. And I think it's important that we take advantage of those options when they're there. But I also think it's important to recognize that with almost every presidential election, the pendulum swings on what is and isn't supported. And I would really like us to find our own way as a cooperative and set that future. And I know a lot of work has been done, currently in the strategic plan to do that by setting these goals. But I think that to just set ourselves on a path immediately right now without having other options open and considered and available could be problematic in the future. I know the resilience of Alaskans, especially, and our pride to get things done is what's going to help us succeed. And I think we need to find a way to put that together with what our future expectation is, so that we can continue to have a reliable power source and not just a dream of what that might look like.
Certainly. Well, we all know that Chugach needs to diversify its portfolio of generation. We're at over 80% gas-fired generation. We need to change that, especially with the what we know is a limited supply of gas in Cook Inlet. And so I very strongly support bringing on clean and renewable energy, with the caveat that we need to do it in a very measured and prudent way. There are a number of challenges with bringing that on. Making it dispatchable, renewable is not dispatchable, and being able to integrate that into our dispatchable power is critical. One of the biggest obstacles we have is our grid system will not accommodate, at this point, large commercial renewable energy. Does that mean that we don't want it? Absolutely not. We do want it, but we want to bring it on in a way that does not negatively impact our members' rates. And there is a way to do that. We're very confident of that. With the federal funding that's coming down the path, we have an opportunity, and Chugach has a working group with the other utilities to seek out these federal funds that will allow us to start upgrading our grid, which will then make it available so that we can integrate the renewable energy. We have a carbon reduction goal that we are working towards, which will require us to implement renewable energy. So I'm very confident that we can do it. It has to be done economically, and it has to be done on a timeline that works for the utility and for consumers. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Well, like Shana said in our opening statements, I think you'll hear from every candidate here that they support transitioning to renewable energy, and I agree with that. I agree with a lot of what Harold said as well. And I guess I come from a perspective of what are we going to do in the next several years to really lay the groundwork so that we are on a very strong path to renewable power. And there's some that can be implemented near term and some that will take longer. But we need to make an investment to ensure that we are on that path, because again, these are decisions that will affect my children and my children's children. And that's how I'm thinking about it, is what during my time on the board can I do to make sure that Chugach is moving down that path that still maintains the other core values of affordability and reliability. So a couple of things. First, we're very lucky here in South Central Alaska to have so many renewable energy sources available to us if we are able to make the investment, and like Harold said, if we're able to make the integration into the grid. So what is that going to take? I applaud the leadership at Chugach and the board members from looking at many different options to take advantage of funds from the Inflation Reduction Act and having a conversation with our other partners on the rail belt about how we can all move forward together, because some of this will be a rail belt solution and not just a Chugach solution. And then I also think, again, near term, there's things like solar that we can look at from a utility scale, but also from a residential scale. And are we pursuing both at the same time? Rooftop solar, if you just look around Anchorage and south-facing roofs, what can we gain there? How can we incentivize both businesses, large landowners, and residents to be part of this solution? So that's a near-term thing. And then again, long-term, I think we need to work with independent power producers to see how we can make the transition to renewable power more accessible to them, and again, look at it from a rail belt perspective, because there's certain things that Chugach will be able to do better, and there's certain things that other rail belt utilities will be able to do better. So let's broaden that conversation. Thank you.
All right. Bettina.
All right, thanks, Ashley. Well, like the previous candidates, both Harold and Suzanne, I am a strong proponent for integrating more renewable energy sources into the grid. We absolutely need to do that. We need cleaner sources. We need to diversify our portfolio. We have a dwindling gas supply, and it's an inevitable energy transition that we are going to have to make. And Chugach has been aggressively pursuing renewable energy as we have made lots of decisions in the recent past to figure out a way to move this program forward. Harold mentioned that we have a decarbonization goal. For the first time, we put together a decarbonization goal in December of last year, and it's in our strategic plan. And this goal was set based on practical viability of being able to implement projects in the next few years that are actually integratable into our grid, given our current system. When you have variable power generation sources like wind and solar, it's very difficult with the physical constraints of our system to actually integrate large-scale utility-grade projects. We are pursuing 2 utility-scale projects of the 120 megawatt size. We have a large-scale solar and a large-scale wind project that we are considering. So we are doing what we can. I am completely a proponent of integrating more renewable sources, but not at any cost. Within the constraints of the physical system, we will get there, but not at all costs. We need to protect the affordability and maintain our existing assets that we've invested in. So I'm a proponent of renewable sources for practical. Thank you.
All right, and Jim.
Thank you, and thanks for that question. I was on the board in 2011 when we signed the power purchase agreement for the Fire Island Wind Project. I was a proponent of that and helped to push that through. It's interesting to note that since that time, about 10 years ago, the cost of solar energy production has come down. This is a nationwide average by 2/3. Wind power generation, no, let's see, solar energy has come down by 80%. Wind power costs have come down by 2/3, and the cost of battery storage have come down by 2/3. So what we paid to Siri for Fire Island would be a lot less if it was done today, just because of the reduction in price in the technology. At the same time, due to the infrastructure bill that's passed Congress, $110 billion is being made available to electrical co-ops across the country. $110 billion for infrastructure improvements. Along with that, there's a 30% tax credit for independent power producers. Chugach doesn't get to take advantage of a tax credit because we're a nonprofit entity, but for independent power producers, they presumably could pass on 30% of their tax credit savings to us if we were to buy power from them. I agree with the previous speakers that grid upgrades are going to be really necessary so we can wheel that power across the entire rail belt. But in the meantime, for the short term, I think there's great promise in Anchorage for rooftop solar. Also, I think Fire Island is sitting there ready with pads already developed. A lot of the infrastructure has already been developed with Fire Island 1 so that the Fire Island can continue to be developed in the future. And I will say one thing about affordability, and that is it depends on what lens you're looking through when you can think about affordability. But if you look at the cost of importing LNG, which is tremendously more than what we pay now for gas, the affordability of renewables looks much, much better.